Hey, so in this video I'd like to answer a question that comes up quite quickly when people first come across Amender, which is a tool for basically customizing content on the fly and adding styles and integrating scripts and things like that. Is they ask if it's performant, and sometimes people wonder about Microthemer, which is a visual CSS editor that has quite a powerful editor, and they wonder if on the front end if that slows things down. And you can use both together as well, and that's another open question. So in this video I'd like to give you some real-world performance results, explain how I've tested that, and cover how Amender works internally, including like its security features, how it integrates other tools, and the reasoning behind its pricing. And my hope is that by the end you should be able to make a really informed decision about whether you want to use Amender in your existing WordPress stack. So on this test site here, I've installed various plugins that you'll probably have heard of, like Contact Form 7, Elementor, Generate Blocks, Jetpack. Some that are known for being actually quite performant, like Really Simple Security, and the Bricks theme is also installed, and some simple plugins like they just do a redirection or like a cookie, like a consent cookie notice or something. And to give you a sense of where Amender fits in terms of performance with all these other plugins, I'm using a free plugin called CoProfiler, which I highly recommend. We're going to test a short, small page as a logged out user using the Bricks theme, so we can compare Bricks with Elementor as well. And what we get is this handy little graph, which basically on the left here we've got seconds. So this is a third of a second, this is a tenth of a second, or 100 milliseconds, said differently, 50 milliseconds, and we can see that basically Amender is over here in this category of very lightweight plugins. So it's less than 50 milliseconds for overall. I think it's saying it's about 24. So it's contributing very little to your overall performance budget. In the same category as tools that just do a few things, because Amender doesn't do quite as much as you might think. On the front end, it on-queues some styles and a few scripts which can make changes to the HTML, and later there's also an option to do some server-side HTML edits, but it's all done quite efficiently. As you would expect, the tools that do a bit more, like a WooCommerce plugin, Elementor, Bricks theme, they're all feature-rich applications that are central to the way the website actually functions, and so they can use up more of the performance budget. I should point out that they're not actually, the page that we've tested, the home page, is just a regular Gutenberg page, so it's not an Elementor page, it's not a Bricks page. So these plugins might be doing adding a bit more to the performance budget if, for instance, it was a shop page that we were testing WooCommerce on, or an Elementor page, etc. So this is just the incidental kind of weight that they add on the server side. So this isn't to do with how long the assets, like the CSS and the JavaScript, takes to download in the browser. This is just measuring time on the server. Because sometimes when you install a number of fairly heavy plugins, there can be a long time until the server responds, because it's doing this server-side processing, and that's kind of, when you've got too many, sometimes you get like a server response time of like 3 seconds, and that's where you start to feel like you've got a slow website. So I highly recommend that everyone uses this CoProfiler plugin just to run a quick assessment on your website. You'll get a total up here, and you'll get a good breakdown here. This will just give you a nice sort of overview snapshot. It's also a good idea actually to run it like more than once, because if I was to run it again, you'd probably get slightly different ordering of like and certainly in terms of the fast things. So Amender might appear before or after WP consent occasionally, but the pattern should stay the same. So I've done it again, but we've still got these same plugins up here. If we then want to get a slightly more detailed view, I recommend using a plugin called Query Monitor. So I'm going to deactivate all of these plugins. So I'm just going to enable Amender and Microthemer by itself, and Query Monitor, and just activate those two. Then I'm going to log out and get some stats just for the homepage here. So this is the edit I've done with Amender. I've added this edited text, and I've used the Microthemer visual interface to set up a green background. And because I've gone into the Query Monitor options where I've set an authentication cookie, which means I can basically still get the stats here, even though I'm logged out, about 155 milliseconds that is, or 0.15 seconds, and some memory usage, the number of queries it took and how long. And we can also, if we inspect the page and go to the Network tab, and then I'll just refresh the page, we can also see some useful information down here about the amount of data that was transferred. So 21 requests, that's like JavaScript files or images, etc. This is the amount of data that was transferred over the network. So that means if there's some gzipping involved, which there probably is because this value here is the uncompressed version, so 300 kilobytes roughly was sent over in compressed form, and then that was expanded, but this is the main thing that matters. And then over here we've got the time for the DOM to load and then the total load time of the page. And I'm running these tests just on a local server, so that's why we've got maybe slightly higher load time than you will get in a production site. And so if you want to get a detailed analysis of how much performance impact a plugin is having, I recommend having the Query Monitor overview results here and comparing this, and then refreshing the page several times, because these numbers here will change a little bit. So I've just refreshed again, and then if I check, so it's 1.6 this time, number of database queries stays roughly the same, and so does the memory, but this will change quite a bit, and so will the load time down here. The amount transferred though, and the request should stay the same. And so what I've basically gone and done is do this for every single plugin. So I've measured the amount of time it takes for just the theme without any plugins installed, and that's our zero measure. I basically had a table down here where I put in the absolute numbers that you just saw from Query Monitor in the Network tab, and then I converted it to milliseconds, and then this is the difference basically. And just like the Code Profiler plugin showed us, we've got WooCommerce and Elementor and Jetpack around the top, and then some sort of, say, medium performance impact plugins here, and then kind of the very low impact plugins down here, including Microthemer with Amender installed, SEO Framework, a redirection plugin, and a cookie consent plugin. So we're just going to log back in now. I'll close this inspection tab. And so basically, if you just go through this system, deactivate one plugin, activate another plugin, always remember to log out, because many plugins, including Amender and Microthemer, tend to load assets for logged-in administrators that are necessary for the editor to work, that are not loaded for regular site visitors. So for a fair comparison of how much weight a plugin adds to the front end, it's important to log out. But just before I move on, I'm just going to show you the Query Monitor settings I had. So basically there was an option here to set an authentication cookie, which I did, and that allows you to inspect the page like you saw just earlier, once you've actually logged out as well. Okay, so now let's have a little look at what actually happens if I'm going to deactivate these two plugins here that we don't need actually. Deactivate those, just have Amender and Microthemer active. We're going to look at how well it scales, because so far we've only looked at editing this one page here with just one or two changes on it. So basically this, we've made it green, and this edited text here has been added using the add text option and entering this in here. So if we were to remove that, we'll see that this goes back to its original. Now the default way that Amender actually makes that change is by doing it using the DOM content loaded event. And that's basically an event in the browser that happens when all of the content has been downloaded into the browser. And if we go to the review panel, we can have a look at what impact that has. So basically asset preparation is just preparing some JavaScript. There's no server-side edits because our only change is just using an in-browser client-side change. So it's just a couple of milliseconds. But it does add a small amount of JSON, basically the instruction to add this change, and Amender's script, which it needs for it to work. And if we scroll down, we can just see that there is a record of the two changes affecting this page, where we edited the text and then we added some CSS to make the background color green and have a bit of padding. If we wanted to make the change happen on the server, we can set this event option here to server-side ready, and then we can review this again. And here we see that, just a couple of milliseconds were taken on the server to make that edit so it's actually part of the HTML sent to the browser. And sometimes you might want to use a server-side event because there can be like a very quick flash where the this text is visibly not there when the page first loads and then suddenly appears there. Okay, so it's a bit of a layout shift. So setting server-side ready can prevent that from happening. Also, if you are adding some content, some text content, and you wanted the text to be indexable by search engines, then server-side HTML ready is another option that's useful. Okay, so this is quite this is a small number of edits on a small page. Let's now go to this medium page, and I'll just scroll down to give you a sense of the size of it. I basically just copied and pasted some blocks several times to make the page a little bit longer. So you can see it's kind of a reasonably long page, but fairly typical. And what I'm going to do to test this page is basically just undisable some edits, some test edits I've added. So you can see I basically just added some text, selected various elements, added some text, set the background color to green so it's obvious you can see what Amender's doing. And if I just jump to any of these selectors, I can click the review option again. And they're all of these edits are happening in the browser, so there's nothing happening on the server side. And again, we've just got our Amender script, which was about 17 kilobytes, and then there's a bit more JSON because there's a bit more on the front end because of the 10 edits basically, which is just represented. Again, it's only it's only 3 kilobytes in total, so it's not much. And if we wanted to just quickly check if they were all server-side edits, there is actually an option in preferences to set the default modification point to serverHTMLReady, so you don't have to select that for 10 different items. So this bit confirms that the default event we're now using is serverHTMLReady. So let's just review our 10 edits. And as we can see that this HTML adjustments time has gone up a bit. We're now at 10 milliseconds. The overall is still at 13. It's still very fast, to be honest. And also we're not loading any of the JavaScript assets because all of the edits are happening on the server side. So now let's enable a few more of these folders. So I'm going to say, if I enable these 4, that means I've got 50 edits in total. Okay, and then I'm going to just go to this page here, click the review button. So this is where, you're about 50 milliseconds now. This is where you probably want to use caching if you were really going to add 50 server-side edits. So, I mean, I would question that you would ever need to because below the fold content, so stuff that isn't visible when the page first loads, you don't really need to use a server-side edit unless it's for SEO because no one's going to see the flash of unstyled content. But making 25 edits somewhere on the page that are all server-side is still totally fine on a sort of medium-length page. So now let's finally look at an extremely long page. Okay, so you can see just from the size of this scroll bar down here that this is a really, really long page. I basically just copied these blocks loads and loads of times. And this is kind of the length page that you're rarely going to get. Maybe if a page builder is producing too much HTML, it's possible you might get there. And so just to test things at their extreme, I'm going to undisable all of these folders now. So we've got 100 edits in total, and they're all server-side edits. And so if I just go to the review panel, we can then see it's adding lots of time. It's adding like half a second. Okay, so this is an extreme case. You would never want to do that. But let's say you did need to make 100 edits to a really long page. Well, actually, you've still got a viable option with Amender. So you can go to the preferences. I'm going to turn this to DOM content loaded, save the preferences, and then check the review. And see, we've our total server-side processing time has gone back down to 5 milliseconds, which is basically nothing. Instead, we're just using JavaScript for all of our edits. The JSON is still quite small; it's only 30 kilobytes. So taken in combination with Amender's script, it's about 46 kilobytes, which is fine. And if we still wanted to add just a few server-side edits for, say, above-the-fold content or keywords, we can still do that. Let's see what happens when we just set one server-side edit, and we'll review that. And even though we're working on a truly massive page, just adding one server-side edit still didn't add much to the processing time, like 15 milliseconds overall, with 11 milliseconds for doing that HTML adjustment. So hopefully you can see that Amender actually scales really well, even in the really extreme case of a massive page and needing to apply lots of edits to that page. Okay, so in this section we're taking a look under the hood and seeing how the code in Microthemer and Amender actually works. So this section is aimed at developers, but if you're not familiar with code, you might want to just follow along and listen as I explain how some of the features work. So Amender and Microthemer share basically the same entry file. There's just a few details that are different here. But the first thing that it checks after setting some variables is whether we're in the admin area, and if so, it loads the class for editing, basically for the editor, but only if this check here just checks that the user is an administrator. So there's no other kind of role that is allowed to access Microthemer or Amender. It's purely for users with the highest level of access. And that's useful from a security perspective because it means that basically the functionality just won't run unless very early on this check is made. So there's no way that if kind of deeper in the code, if I've forgotten to do a permissions check, that someone with like lower access, like a subscriber, could do things that they shouldn't be able to do. So if it's a site front end, we check again if it's an administrator, and if so, we load some like extra JavaScript files, etc., for making the editor work. Otherwise, it's just a regular site visitor, and we just route to this asset load file. The asset load file basically just unqueues any of the JavaScript and CSS we want to load, and if Amender is active, then it will make adjustments to the HTML either on the server side or by adding some JavaScript, which makes the HTML changes happen in the browser. One of the things that sets a Microthemer and Amender apart is the fact that this file can load completely independently of the plugin. It actually gets copied to a directory here called Microthemes, which is just in the WP content folder. And so here we can see it's available here, and it's not just available as a plugin file within the Microthemer directory, and that means we can completely uninstall Microthemer on production or Amender, because it's the same structure basically these two plugins have, and instead we can just manually call this file. And you could do that by adding some code to your themes functions.php file. But there's also a plugin called Microloader, which basically is just very simple. It just checks if the path to this file exists and that Microthemer isn't already running, and then just loads this new asset load class. And that's considered more secure because this asset load class only reads information from the database and loads existing files. It can't update anything. And so it's not vulnerable to the kinds of problems that certain plugins, editors, code snippet plugins, etc. have, where they can be, if there's a vulnerability found, it can be exploited by hackers if they find a security hole in a piece of software. And of course, plugin developers never intentionally leave these, or shouldn't intentionally leave these holes. But if you take a look at WordFence, you can see that from time to time builders, including the big ones and the small ones, do make mistakes from time to time. And this system of fully separating the editor from just loading the files that have already been created was in a read-only process, which this asset load class does. It just eliminates many of the problems that typical WordPress editors, form plugins, etc. have, where the editor remains active in production as well. So let's just take a quick tour of this plugin. So there's an initiation function here that runs as long as we haven't detected that another instance, so say the editor is actually still available. We get some preferences, and both Microthemer and Amender have a system of optimizing the size of the preferences retrieved such that only settings that are absolutely needed on the front end are retrieved, and it doesn't get unnecessary settings that are used only by the editor. Then there's a check for Amender, so if you're using Microthemer but you haven't enabled Amender as an add-on, then this will never run. But if you have, or you're just using the standalone version of Amender, then this content class will be set up. And looking further down, there's a bit of cache busting stuff here. And then the hook CSS function is the main function that we use to kickstart asset loading. We basically determine which hook to use, and that depends on the whether you're loading assets in the admin area or the front end. Because both Microthemer and Amender do actually support making customizations to the admin area in case you want to theme or customize the WordPress dashboard for your clients. So if we scroll down, we can see some code for adding global CSS or conditionally loading CSS. That basically just means loading a CSS file on a particular page, not every page of your site. This feature means that you can add lots of different CSS to lots of different pages, and there isn't going to be a cumulative bloat effect, which you would get if you just added all CSS to a single global style sheet. And the way that's supported in Microthemer is that some logic is defined at the folder level. So let's just look at this folder, for example. So this looks like PHP code, but it's not actually processed as PHP code because there's security issues with that. Some plugins use a val to execute like a text string as if it was arbitrary PHP code. Microthemer and Amender, it may look like that's what it's doing, but actually this is basically just processed as a text file. It's the syntax that's supported is valid PHP syntax, just to make it easy for people who know PHP to add custom conditions using and or and nested brackets and things like that. But really what happens is there's a handful of these functions which are on a whitelist. So these are allowed functions, and it basically just extracts these function names from the text and runs them. And what this process does is basically determine which of these folders that you have in your editor will actually apply their assets to any given page. So once we've determined which folders are applicable to the current page, this init content amendments function will run if Amender is active. So that's where we need to look at the asset load content class. So here we do some checks to see if the user is editing. And if we've got an administrator, then we might do some extra work like generating the statistics in the review panel in Amender, so we can see how long things are taking. And if the user has applied some sort of amendment, then we prepare a way to modify the HTML. This is just for server-side edits, by the way. So let's just go back to the asset load class. If we dig into the conditional assets class, we can see that in the conditional assets on queuing section, we determine a list of folders that are going to run, so we can collect all of the data we need using this function here that uses an optimized way to get all of the data necessary for all of the folders that load just in a single database query. So let's have a look at this getActiveSlugs function here. Now the front-end preferences, which I mentioned earlier, which are separate from the preferences used by the editor, that's auto-loaded, meaning it's included when WordPress pulls auto-load data from the settings, so it doesn't incur any additional database queries. And then that information is used to get global content and code here. And from our previous assessment of which folders are loading, we then loop through all of the folders, which also lists any snippets that are contained within those folders. Now it's just the IDs, but what we do is we use those IDs to create a single SQL query to select the snippet content using slug IDs basically, which is an indexed column within the database, so we can do really fast queries. So it's one query and it's super fast and it's indexed, and this system avoids the problem, the n+1 problem, where as the amount of data in the editor grows, sometimes that can generate an increasing number of database queries, which over time could affect performance. But this system avoids those kind of scalability problems. So now let's jump back to the init content amendments function. So we've obtained all of the slugs we need for our single query, and then we perform that request. And if we have some data, we prepare an array for storing all the different things that we're going to apply to the page, like CSS, JavaScript, etc. At this point, we determine which edits might need to apply on the server or just in the browser. And if we do have some server-side settings, this is saved in a class property for processing later on once all of the other plugins and themes have done their thing. So let's now take a look at this function here. This variable here stores the JSON data that we looked at earlier when we were on the review panel. That was a kilobyte or two of data when we just had a few amendments, and it went up to about 30 when we had 100. But the size of this data will depend on the size of the snippets you're adding as well. The data is all stored on a window.amender variable, so you can inspect that in your browser if you choose. And then we've got some code for generating an import map for any npm packages that we've included alongside our JavaScript. Import maps mean that we can use ES6 module imports where we reference scripts just by name like GSAP or 3, and allows us to work with JavaScript in the modern way like we would when we're using something like a build tool like Vite or something. So moving on, Amender automatically adds the import syntax, so that just takes away some of the boilerplate and means that we can reference modules inside functions. In the Amender interface, that's the feature where it says run function, which is by default the 6th tab. Then these functions are all available on an object called window.af, so you can easily reference one function from another function. Amender will take care of making sure that all the functions are loaded. So in the interface you can always write af.function1, and then from function 2 you can write af.function3, and so on. Amender will automatically detect this cross-dependency from the code you write and make sure that the assets load on the front end for you. Then further down here, it just includes any external JavaScript modules that you may have added using the add.js combination of an action and an aspect. And then finally, the empty events is the script that basically just makes everything work on the front end, all of the DOM adjustments, browser, event responses, and when things come into view using this visibility observer. And as we saw in the video earlier, that collectively all of this came to about 17 kilobytes, which will be even less when gzipped. So that's everything we do on the front end. If we jump to the iterate mods, this iterate mods function here is what makes server-side editing possible. So let's just jump in here. And this section here where we pass the document is what makes this possible. So DOMDocument has had a reputation in the past of being quite memory intensive, but newer versions of PHP have greatly improved that. And when it's just used once, as is the case with Amender, where the whole HTML page is passed once rather than passing many different fragments multiple times, it's actually very quick. And that's why we were able to get such impressive performance timing when we were using this, as long as we weren't using 100 edits on a very large document. So we can run this on a very large document of 500 kilobytes, and as long as our list of server-side edits isn't too long, we can still perform all of these tasks in, say, 10 milliseconds or so. So when we're going through all of our changes, basically what we're doing is searching the past HTML using an XPath query, which gives us some nodes to work with, and then we apply a specific modification to those nodes. So we extract the data we need and then loop through the nodes and basically just apply actions depending on what the instruction is. And for client-side edits on the front end, there is a file which basically runs exactly the same type of thing. This apply mod function, which this is the minified version, but if we look down here and jump to the execute function, we basically get a very similar looking thing where we set some variables and then run whatever action we need to do. So if we now go to the website front end, and then I'm going to go ahead and inspect this long page, and then go to the console and write, I can get the window object, and then I can see there are no functions running on this page. And if I expand the Amender option, I can see all of this data here, which shows me what's applying. And because we finished by setting hundreds of our edits to all happen server-side, we've got a long list here, which we can dig into if we like to find all of the different modifications that we've got. And I think that wraps up the code talk, because that basically shows you from start to finish how Amender on-queues styles conditionally and makes changes either on the server or the front end, depending on what you set for the event, whether it's DOM content loaded or serverHTMLReady. So now let's take a quick look at the AI assistant. So I'm going to go navigate to this short page again, and I'm going to just wipe out everything we've done, reset everything. I'm just going to click on here and ask our AI assistant to do something. So I might use this option here to reword the text, and I'll say, and reduce the font size. So we can see that it's changed the text and it's made it a bit smaller as well. Down in this code editor section here, we can see that basically the CSS it generated was a font size rule, And this comment here is what makes the Amender integration work. So this is the action, replace text, and the snippet has a specific ID. And if we click on the HTML, we can see the content of this snippet. And all of this comment stuff is basically just markup that allows the AI's output to synchronize with the Amender interface. And then once this content is in the interface, we can go ahead and edit it. And in terms of how things technically work on the front end, it's just exactly the same as if we were just adding all this stuff ourselves. So there's no extra overhead at all for using the AI editor. It's just something that can speed up your workflow as you're working with the editor. So how does this line up with page builders and the editing interface that they've got? Well, everything's happening on the fly, and it's happening just on the front end in this case. And we've updated the text here to say unleash your imagination. If we go to edit the page and then scroll down, we've still got the original text. So Amender hasn't gone in and changed anything in the database permanently. If we were to remove this edit or uninstall Amender, then the front-end page would just show this text as well. So it's a safe way to mess around if you're not particularly technical, or use the AI assistant knowing that it's not going to permanently change anything. But you need to be aware that Amender, there's going to be the amended version, and then there's going to be the base version. Okay, and so personally as a developer, I like to keep things neat, and I would just write the paragraph, update the paragraph within Gutenberg, and I would use Amender when there's something I can't do within my builder. Say Gutenberg didn't give me the option to customize these buttons in exactly the way I wanted. I could keep them as they are and just use Amender to add little flourishes to them, like animate them or insert like a little icon badge or something like that. But you can still use Amender and the AI assistant to prototype changes. So I've got it to update some copy for me, and then I could just go here, add the new copy, and then just clear my change, and now there's just one single source of truth on that. But if you're non-technical, then using Amender to just work with the front end, so let's just go back to the front end page. And so sometimes, or say you're not technical, say you've inherited a website that you haven't built, and you don't know exactly where this section comes from, because sometimes it's a combination of not just, say, the root editor like Gutenberg or a page builder, but various plugins that are in use. You can use Amender to just skip the job of finding out, basically skip the detective work, and just go ahead and start editing things. Because Amender gives you full control over the final rendered HTML once all of the plugins and themes have done their thing. So you're working with the CSS, but you've got the same level of control as if you were just creating a static HTML website, and instead of using third-party tools, you've actually just custom-built everything. So that's the area where Amender really shines, and I'll be covering use cases in upcoming videos on exactly what you can do with Amender. Finally, let's talk about pricing, because Amender's model is a little bit different and hopefully a lot fairer. So first, the free trial is feature complete and has no time limit. So you can explore everything, test it fully, and confirm it solves your problem before you pay. And you only actually need a license when you're ready to publish your changes live. And second, even if you don't renew your license, you can still update the plugin from your WordPress dashboard in the usual way you would update any plugin that's free in the WordPress repository. So that means you always get any bug fixes for the features that exist when you purchased Amender, and any security updates forever. So you only need to renew if you want access to new features. Basically, the new features just won't be available to you in your interface if you've decided not to renew. But there's no lock-in, so you just pay once, you can keep using it indefinitely, and your clients won't be forced to incur some sort of recurring costs for the tools that you use. And with this system, it's kind of like a hybrid subscription lifetime deal. You've got most of the benefits of a full lifetime deal, particularly with regards to the peace of mind. It's just you don't pay once and get new features forever. But because of that, I can offer Amender at a lower rate than I offer Microthemer at, which does have a full-time unlimited license. So I hope this video has answered some of your questions about Amender's performance, security, compatibility, and just how it works in general. The real magic of Amender is that it solves something that we've all just accepted about WordPress, that once you use pre-made content like blocks, builder modules, or third-party forms, that you lose some control. And Amender changes that by giving it back. So it gives you precise control over any part of the page in a way that's reversible and very appropriate for using with AI. And I want to finish with a big thanks to Angelika Reisiger for promoting Amender and sharing ideas like inserting ads and fixing translations, and to Ivan Arnadov for his accessibility and legacy customization ideas for it. If you can think of some use cases yourself after watching this video, then please do leave comments below the video on YouTube. So thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to try this, head over to themeover.com now and grab yourself a copy of Amender. Thank you very much.